The scream did not come from the child. It came from the woman standing beside her, and by the time the sound reached the far end of the ballroom, the girl had already gone down. Aveline Marsh saw it from the low stage where she sat with her cello, 3 bars into a piece she had practiced every night for a month. A girl in a pale blue dress, no older than 12, had folded at the knees near the tall windows. Her hands were pressed to her own throat. Her mouth opened and shut, and nothing came out of it. Around her, more than 100 guests in silk and black wool turned like a slow tide, and not one of them stepped toward her. Aveline's fingers had already failed her once that night. 2 minutes earlier, under the weight of every polished eye in the room, her bow had trembled and slid, and she had heard the thin, ugly scrape of a note going wrong. A ripple of quiet amusement had moved through the tables. She had felt her face go hot. She had kept playing anyway, hands shaking, certain she had ruined the one evening that was supposed to save her month. But the girl on the floor changed something in her body. The shaking stopped. Aveline set the cello on its side without thinking, stepped down off the stage, and crossed the floor while the room was still deciding whether to be embarrassed or afraid. A man in a grey suit reached for the child's shoulders to haul her upright. Aveline caught his wrist before he could. "Do not lift her," she said. "She cannot breathe lying down, and she will not breathe faster if you frighten her more." He stared at her. She was nobody. She was the help in a borrowed black dress. But something in her voice made him let go. Aveline knelt an arm's length from the girl, not closer. The child's eyes were huge and glassed over, fixed on nothing, her chest heaving in short, useless pulls that never reached the bottom of her lungs. Aveline had seen that exact drowning look before, on a face she had loved, and the memory arrived and left in the same half-second. "My name is Aveline," she said quietly. "I am going to stay right here. May I come closer?" The girl did not answer. They never could, at the worst of it. But her eyes flicked once toward the voice, and that was enough. Aveline reached into the small pocket sewn inside her sleeve and drew out a little brass tuning fork, worn smooth from years of her thumb. She struck it softly against her own knee. A single clean tone lifted into the noise of the room, low and steady, the kind of note you feel in the breastbone more than hear. "That is the sound we breathe to," she murmured. "Slow. Just that one note. You do not have to do anything else." She began to hum under the tone, 4 notes, low and simple, falling and rising and falling again. It was the same 4 notes she had hummed 1,000 times in a small hospital room years ago in the dark, to someone who could not be saved by it, but had been comforted by it all the same. The older guests had begun to press in. Aveline did not look at them. The moment she looked at the crowd, her hands would start to shake again. So she looked only at the child. "You are not dying," she said. "It feels exactly like dying, and it is not. Your body is trying to protect you, and it forgot how to stop. We are going to remind it. Breathe with the note, in, and let it fall." The girl's next breath caught, then reached a little deeper. "There," Aveline whispered. "You are allowed to be scared. Being scared is not the same as being in danger." Again. Another breath. Deeper still. The terrible heaving began to slow. The child's shoulders dropped a fraction from around her ears. A tear slid down her face and she made a small sound, and it was a human sound, not the airless choking from before. And that was when a hand closed hard around Aveline's upper arm and wrenched her backward. "Get away from her," a woman hissed. "How dare you put your hands on that child?" Aveline sprawled sideways onto the polished floor. The tuning fork skittered out of her grip and rang once against the marble. A tall woman in ivory silk stood over her, beautiful and furious, and behind her 2 men in dark suits were already reaching down. Aveline understood all at once how it looked: the hired musician on the ground, the rich man's ward crumpled and crying, the crowd's faces, which had been softening, snapped shut again into that expression she knew so well, the one that decided you were the problem before it asked a single question. "She was helping," Aveline tried to say. Her voice came out too small. "She was making a scene," the woman in ivory said, loud enough for the room. "The girl was perfectly fine until this person crawled off the stage. Someone take her outside before she does something worse." "I did not touch her. I only," Aveline started, and heard how it sounded and stopped. The hands lifted her by both arms and turned her toward the doors, and she went. Because fighting would only prove them right, and because somewhere under her ribs a voice she had spent 2 years trying to unlearn was already agreeing with them. "You ruin things, you turn calm into chaos." People have to manage you. She walked out through the great glass doors onto the terrace, into the cold and the falling snow, and the doors swung shut behind her on all that gold light and warmth. She got as far as the stone balustrade before her legs stopped holding her opinions, and she sank down against it and began to cry. Not gently, the kind of crying that has been saved up for a long time and finally finds a door open. She did not hear the music stop inside. She did not see the crowd near the windows go still. She only felt the cold coming up through the stone and thought, with a strange flat calm, that she would not be paid tonight, that she would not be hired again, that she had been given one clean chance to be someone other than the woman Warren had described, and she had failed it in front of every important person on the lake. Behind the glass, a door somewhere in the crowd opened. Corrado Sarno had been at the top of the staircase when Nella went down, and he had come through 200 people like a blade through water. He reached the girl in blue as her breathing steadied, dropped to one knee, and she turned her wet face up to him and said in the smallest voice that the lady with the little bell had made the drowning stop. He asked which lady. Half the room, eager to be useful to a man like him, pointed at the doors. Corrado Sarno rose, and the whole glittering assembly watched the most feared man in the province turn away from them. There were women in that room who had been placed in his path all night, daughters of old families in gowns that cost more than the musician earned in a year, arranged near him like an offering. He walked past every one of them. He did not slow. He crossed the ballroom and pushed open the glass doors and stepped out into the snow toward the shape of a woman, weeping alone against the stone. Aveline heard the footsteps and looked up, and her whole body went cold in a way the winter had nothing to do with. She knew that silhouette. Everyone on the lake knew it. The men who had thrown her out had been his men. She was a stranger who had put her hands on his family and made a spectacle at his gala. And now he had come himself. She got her feet under her and stood, because she would not be found on the ground again. He stopped an arm's length from her. Snow was already settling on the shoulders of his black coat. For a long moment he only looked at her, and his face gave away nothing at all. "You are the one who touched my sister," he said. It was not a question. It landed like the closing of a door. "I am," Aveline said. She heard her own voice shake and hated it. Inside she had been steady as stone with her hands on a dying child. Out here, with a powerful man's eyes on her, and 100 faces pressed to the glass at his back, the old tremor was already crawling up her arms. It was the great cruel joke of her life. She could hold another person through the worst minute of their year, and she could not hold a teacup when someone important was watching her do it. "I know how it looked," she went on before he could speak. "I know I am the hired help, and I came off that stage without being asked, and I put my hands near your family. You can take it out of my fee. You can take all of it, but I need you to know that I did not hurt her. She was having a panic attack, a bad one, the kind where the body convinces itself it is drowning. I did not do that to her. I only sat with her until it passed." Behind him the doors opened again, and the woman in ivory silk came out onto the terrace, drawn like a moth to the possibility of someone else's ruin. This was Octavia Voss, though Aveline did not yet know her name. She knew only the type. She had spent years married to the male version of it. "Corrado, please do not let this creature waste your evening," Octavia said, arranging her voice into something warm for him and cold underneath. The girl fainted. Children faint at these things. It is far too loud for them. This person made a scene out of it. Honestly, hiring musicians off a list, one never knows what one is inviting into the house. Aveline felt the words settle over her like a wet coat. She had heard 100 versions of this speech. This one had better jewelry. She looked at the snow gathering on her own thin shoes and waited for the man to agree, because men like him always agreed with women like her, because it cost them nothing and it kept the evening smooth. But Corrado Sarno did not look at Octavia at all. He kept his eyes on Aveline, and something behind them had sharpened. "You said drowning," he said. Aveline looked up. "What?" "You said the body convinces itself it is drowning." His voice had gone very quiet, and quiet from him seemed to be the thing the whole province was afraid of. "Who told you that?" "The doctors say a great many words to me. That is not one of the ones they use." Aveline did not know what to do with a rich man who asked a follow-up question. In her experience, they did not want your answer. They wanted you gone. She glanced at the glass wall of faces behind him, at the woman in ivory waiting to pounce on whatever she said. "Do not look at them," Corrado said. "Look at me. Who told you that word?" "Nobody told me," she said. "I learned it the way you learn most true things, by being frightened of it myself, and then by sitting with someone else who was." For a moment the terrace held nothing but the hiss of snow. Octavia gave a small laugh, the practiced kind, meant to break a spell. How poetic. "Corrado, she is angling for a story, they always are. Shall I have the men see her to the gate?" "No," he said. The single word cut the laugh off at the root. Ottavia's beautiful face went still, then tight. A few of the watchers at the glass looked at one another. In 11 years, no one on that terrace could remember Corrado Sarno correcting a vase in front of guests over a girl who played cello for hire. He was still looking at Aveline, and now he was looking at her the way a man looks at a locked door he has just heard something move behind. "My sister does not let anyone near her when it happens," he said. "Not me. Not the doctors I pay a great deal of money to fail her. She has bitten a nurse. She put a specialist on the floor of a clinic in the city. Grown men who have never feared anything are afraid of a 12-year-old girl in a blue dress." He paused. "She let you strike a little bell and tell her she was not dying. She has never let anyone do that. Not once. Not in 3 years." Aveline said nothing. Her throat had gone tight for a reason that had nothing to do with the cold. "So I am going to ask you a question," Corrado said, "and I would like you to answer it as though the woman behind me is not here." "She can hear you," Ottavia said. "Yes," he said without turning. That was the point of saying it. And behind him, through the doors, a small figure in a pale blue dress slipped free of the hands trying to hold her, and came out into the snow, searching the terrace with red and swollen eyes, until she found the woman by the balustrade and started toward her. Aveline had not planned to answer any more questions. She had planned to gather what was left of her dignity, and walk down the long drive in the snow, and never come back to this house or these people. That had been the whole of her plan, and it was a good plan, and it lasted right up until the child crossed the terrace and pressed herself against Aveline's side and would not let go. The girl's whole body was still shivering from the aftershock of the attack. Aveline knew that shiver from the inside. She did the only thing her hands knew how to do without shaking. She let her arms settle around the small shoulders, light, offering, never gripping, and she felt the child lean into it the way a frightened animal leans toward the one warm thing in a cold room. Over the girl's head, Aveline looked at the man and did not see, for a moment, the most dangerous person in the province. She saw a brother who had just watched his sister choose a stranger over him and who was not, to her great surprise, angry about it. He was watching the two of them with an expression she could not name because she had never in her adult life been on the receiving end of it. It took her a moment to understand that it was hope, held very carefully so it would not show. And that was when the other voice arrived, the way it always did when something good was happening, sliding in through a crack she had thought she had sealed. "You must be very proud of yourself." It was Warren's voice. It was always Warren's voice. 2 years divorced and he still lived in her head rent-free, still narrated her small victories in that patient, reasonable tone that had made her doubt her own eyes for 7 years. Warren, who had never once raised his hand and had not needed to. Warren, who had a way of standing behind her while she cooked, waiting, so that by the end she burned things she had made 100 times, and then he would sigh and say, gently, that he only worried because she made everything so much harder than it had to be. Warren, who had told their friends she was fragile in a voice full of concern, until she believed she was fragile, until she stopped driving at night, stopped inviting people over, stopped trusting the evidence of her own steady hands. She had learned the thing she now knew about frightened people from the worst year of her own life, sitting in the dark beside her mother's bed in a county hospital, humming 4 notes because they were the only 4 notes that slowed her mother's breathing near the end. Warren had told her after that she had probably made her mother's passing harder, that she brought chaos into rooms. She had almost believed that too. It was the last thing she almost believed before she left him. She had left with 2 suitcases, the cello, the brass tuning fork that had been her mother's, and a coffee tin with a word written on the lid, which held every spare coin she could hide from a man who counted the money. She had rebuilt a life out of borrowed dresses and one-night jobs playing for people who would never know her name. Tonight had been the biggest of those jobs. Tonight she had needed the fee badly enough that she had put on the black dress with the mend at the hem and told herself, "Do not drop anything. Do not be strange. do not be too much. And she had been too much. Of course she had. And somehow, standing in the snow with a rich stranger's little sister shaking against her ribs, being too much had turned out to be the only useful thing she had ever done. You always mistake attention for affection, said the voice in her head. Men like that do not find your accidents charming for long. Aveline closed her eyes for 1 second and did the thing Warren had never known she could do. She set the voice down, not gone, just set down, on the far side of the room, where she could decide later whether it belonged to her. When she opened her eyes, Corrado Sarno had crouched to his sister's level, close but not touching, and Aveline realized he had watched her face do all of that and had not asked her a single thing about it. Nella, he said to the girl very softly, can you tell me what she did that I have never learned to do? The child turned her face against Aveline's arm and answered in a voice almost too small to carry through the snow. She asked first, Nella whispered. Nobody ever asks first. Corrado Sarno went very still, and Aveline saw, in the set of his jaw, the exact moment a powerful man understood that a woman he had thrown out of his house 10 minutes ago had just handed him the answer he had been buying and threatening the whole world to find. He stood. He looked at her for a long moment across the huddled shape of his sister. Do not leave, he said. Whatever they told you at the gate is cancelled. There is a fee, and then there is a conversation, and I would like to have both. Will you come inside? It was, Aveline noticed, the first thing anyone with power had asked her in years instead of told her. She should have said no. Every safe instinct she owned said, walk down the drive. Instead, she looked down at the girl who would not let go of her sleeve, and she heard herself say something that would change the shape of the next year of her life. I will come inside, Aveline said, but not to the party. Corrado Sarno tilted his head a fraction, the way a man does when someone has failed to be afraid of him on schedule. There is a room off the music hall, she went on, where you had the coats taken. It is quiet and it is warm and there are no people in it. She does not need 200 strangers watching her put herself back together. She needs a small room and a closed door and permission to be tired. If you want to have a conversation, we can have it there, where she can sit on the floor if the floor is what her body wants. Ottavia Voss made a sound that was not quite a word. You are letting the cellist choose the rooms of your house now. She has chosen better than my doctors, Corrado said, still not looking at the woman in ivory, and she has done it for free, which is more than they manage. He looked down at his sister. Nella. The coat room or your bedroom upstairs. You decide. The girl considered this with the enormous seriousness of a child who is rarely offered a real choice. The coat room, she whispered. My room is too far and the stairs are loud. Aveline watched the man absorb that. She saw the small flinch behind his eyes, the private arithmetic of a person learning that the stairs in his own home frightened someone he loved and no one had ever told him. She had spent enough years being managed to know the difference between a man who wanted to fix his sister and a man who wanted to understand her. Warren had always wanted to fix. Fixing let you stay the expert. Understanding meant you had to sit on the floor. They went in through a side door, out of the snow, the four of them, Ottavia trailing because she could not bear to be left in a story she was losing. The coat room was long and low, lined with hanging wool and fur, smelling of cold air and other people's perfume. Aveline steered the girl toward the far corner, away from the door, and sat down on the floor with her back to the wall without a moment's hesitation for her borrowed dress. Corrado Sarno stood in the doorway and watched the woman he had thrown out of his house sit down on his floor as though she owned the ground more surely than he owned the walls. You are getting that dress ruined, he said. It is already mended twice, Aveline said. The floor cannot do worse than my life already has. She patted the boards beside her, not looking at the girl, an invitation with no weight in it. Nella. There is room here if you want it. There is also room by the door if you want to be able to leave. Both are fine. The child sat down beside her. Not by the door. Aveline took the brass tuning fork from her sleeve pocket and set it on the floor between them where the girl could see it. She did not strike it. She only let it lie there, a small, honest object, catching the light. That is not a bell, Nella said. Her voice had steadied. Curiosity had begun to do the work fear had been doing. No. It is a tuning fork. It was my mother's. You strike it, and it gives you one true note, and everything else in the room can be a mess, and that note stays exactly what it is. Aveline turned it with one finger. When your body is telling you 100 frightening things all at once, it helps to have one true thing that is not lying to you. That is all it is, a thing that will not lie to you. The girl reached out and touched it. Aveline let her. Behind them, in the doorway, Corrado Sarno had gone completely still, and Ottavia Voss, watching his face, understood before he did that the evening had stopped belonging to her. How long, Corrado said quietly, would it take you to teach me to do that? Aveline looked up at him. It was, she thought, the strangest thing a powerful man had ever asked her, and the first one worth answering. You cannot buy it in an evening, she said, but I can show you where it starts. And she reached for the tuning fork to strike it, and in the doorway behind the boss, a second person had appeared without a sound, watching the small scene on the floor with an expression that would matter a great deal before the night was over. The person in the doorway was a man of about 40 in a doctor's evening clothes, silver at the temples, with the calm, unhurried face of someone the wealthy trusted with their fears. This was Dr. Emil Ravna, the specialist Corrado paid to manage his sister, and he had been looking for the girl for 20 minutes. There you are, he said, and his voice was warm and professional, and it went through Nella like a cold draft. Nella, you gave us a fright. Come along now, let us get you upstairs and get something into you to help you rest. There we are. He stepped into the room, reaching into his bag as he came, producing a small case with the ease of long habit. Nella's breathing changed. Aveline heard it, the short catch at the top, the pull that did not reach the bottom. The girl's hand closed hard around the tuning fork. Doctor, Aveline said. Stop walking, please. Emil Ravna stopped, more out of surprise than obedience, and looked at her as though a chair had spoken. I am sorry, and you are. I am the person she is currently holding on to, Aveline said, keeping her voice low and even, pitched under the tension in the room the way you pitch a rope under a drowning arm. And I am telling you that if you come toward her with that bag open, she is going to have the second attack of the night, and this one will be worse, because the first one taught her body that this room was safe, and you are about to teach it that nowhere is. Miss, the doctor said gently, I have treated this child for 3 years. I understand her condition. You understand her chart, Aveline said. Look at her hands. Everyone looked. The girl's knuckles had gone white around the small brass fork. Her eyes had fixed on the open bag with the flat, glassy stare of an animal that has decided a thing is a threat and will not be talked out of it. When you reach into that bag, Aveline said, what does she think is coming out of it? The doctor's practiced calm slipped for the first time. A mild sedative, that is all, to help her. To make the fear stop by making her stop, Aveline said. She knows that. Her body has learned that the bad feeling ends when a needle makes her disappear for a few hours. So now the fear of the attack and the fear of the needle are the same fear, and you cannot tell them apart anymore, and neither can she. Every time you fix it that way, you make the next one bigger. I am not saying you are a bad doctor. I am saying you have been treating the storm and teaching her to be afraid of the sky. Corrado Sarno had not moved from the doorway. He was looking at the doctor now with a stillness that made Ottavia take a small step back. Is that true? Corrado said. It is an oversimplification, Emil Ravna said, and the tightness in his voice was the tightness of a man who has just heard a true thing said out loud in front of the person who signs his checks. It is not a treatment plan, Aveline said, more gently, because she took no pleasure in it. You are not wrong to have one. A child who is a danger to herself needs a doctor, and I am not one. But right now, in this room, tonight, she does not need the needle. She needs to finish the thing we started outside. May I show you what that looks like, all of you, and if any part of it frightens her, I will stop, and you can do it your way. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Corrado said, Show me. Aveline turned her whole attention to the girl and let the rest of the room fall away because that was the only way it worked. The moment she thought about the doctor watching, or the boss watching, or the woman in ivory waiting for her to fail, her hands would start to shake and she would become the useless, clumsy creature the world kept insisting she was. So she did not think about them. She thought only about the child and the one true note. Nella, she said. You can put the fork down or keep holding it. Either is fine. I am going to strike mine, and we are going to do the slow breath again, and this time I am going to teach you the trick so it belongs to you and not to me. So you can do it in the dark with no one here. Would you like that? The girl nodded. Aveline struck the fork against her own knee. The low, true note lifted into the coat room, and something in the huddled child eased at the sound of it, a small, learned relief, the body recognizing the thing that had rescued it once already tonight. In through your nose, Aveline murmured, while I hum the note down. And when the note stops, you let the breath fall out on its own. You do not push it. You just stop holding it. She began the 4 notes, low and falling. The girl breathed, in on the rise, out on the fall. Aveline talked her through it, in a voice that never rose and never rushed, and she talked about ordinary things between the breaths, the way you lay stepping stones across a flood, because the fear needed somewhere dull and safe to put its feet. She told the girl that the coat room smelled like every winter she had ever played in. She told her that the fur coat above her head had almost certainly cost more than the cellist's entire year, and looked up close a great deal like a sad bear. Nella made a sound that was nearly a laugh, and her next breath went all the way to the bottom. There, Aveline whispered. You did that, not me. The fork just told the truth, and you did the rest. She showed the girl how to strike it on her own knee. She showed her how to find the 4 notes with her own voice, badly, which was the point, because a thing you can do badly in the dark is a thing that belongs to you, and a thing that must be done perfectly by an expert belongs to the expert. She was, without ever once saying so, taking a frightened child's rescue out of the hands of every powerful adult in the room and putting it into the child's own 2 hands, and every adult in the room understood it, and one of them was learning something about himself he would not be able to unlearn. When it was done, Nella struck the fork herself, listened to the note, and let out a breath so slow and so whole that it was hard to believe the same child had been drowning on a ballroom floor an hour before. She looked up at the woman who had taught her, and then she did a thing that stopped every heart in the coat room. She leaned her head against Aveline's shoulder and closed her eyes. Corrado Sarno made a sound. It was very quiet, and he covered it at once, but Aveline heard it, and when she looked up she saw that the most feared man in the province had turned his face away toward the coats so that the room would not see what was happening on it. The gala ended without Aveline. She did not go back to the stage. Someone gathered her cello and her coat, and someone else pressed an envelope into her hand at the side door, with a fee inside it, larger than the one she had been promised. And she walked down the long snowbound drive under the estate lights, with the strange weightless feeling of a person whose life has just changed direction without asking permission. She got exactly as far as the gate before she heard footsteps behind her in the snow. Small footsteps, quick ones. She turned, and there was Nella, coatless, in the pale blue dress, her breath clouding the freezing air, running down the drive with a house full of adults calling her name somewhere behind. Nella, you cannot be out here, you will freeze, Aveline said, already pulling her own coat off her shoulders. Where is your brother? Where is anyone? I want to come with you, the girl said. Aveline stopped with the coat half off. Sweetheart, no. You have a beautiful warm house right there and people who love you, and I am a stranger who plays cello for money. You cannot come with me. You asked first, Nella said, as though that settled the entire matter, as though those 2 words were a deed of ownership. Nobody ever asked first. I want to come with you. And Aveline understood with a small ache that the child had not fallen in love with her. The child had fallen in love with being asked, with being given the choice of the coat room or the door, with a rescue that belonged to her own hands. She had been fixed and managed and sedated by kind, expensive strangers for 3 years, and tonight one broke woman had simply asked her permission, and it had undone her. Aveline crouched and wrapped her 2 thin coat around the girl and held her against the wind and did not answer, because there was no answer that would not break something. That was how Corrado Sarno found them at his own gate. His sister wrapped in the coat of a woman he had thrown out of his house that evening, and the woman kneeling in the snow in a mended dress with her bare arms going white, sheltering a child who was not hers as though she had been doing it all her life. He did not order the girl back inside. Aveline noticed that. A lesser man, a frightened man, would have. He crouched down at a careful distance the way he had learned in the last hour, and he said, Nella, it is very cold and Miss Marsh is turning to ice being kind to you. Will you come inside if I promise you something? What? The girl said, muffled and stubborn against the borrowed coat. That she may come back, he said. Not tonight. Tonight everyone is tired and everyone is cold. But if she agrees, she may come back. That I will ask her and not tell her, and that you may see her when she does. Is that a fair trade for coming out of the snow? The girl thought about it with her whole grave face. Then she nodded and let go of Aveline's sleeve, finger by finger, and let herself be gathered up by a housekeeper who had come hurrying down the drive. That left the two of them at the gate in the falling snow, the boss and the cellist, and Corrado Sarno straightened and looked at the woman shivering in front of him in a dress with two men's in the hem. "You are freezing," he said. "You gave her your coat." "She is 12, Aveline said. "I am not." He took off his own black overcoat, the heavy expensive weight of it, and held it out to her, and Aveline looked at it and did not take it, and something in the not taking made him go still and pay closer attention to her than he had all night. "I do not take coats from men," she said. "I learned that one the hard way. If you lend me a thing, it becomes a reason to see you again, and then the reason becomes an expectation, and I have spent 2 years getting out from under a man's expectations. So thank you, I will be cold. Cold is honest." Corrado Sarno stood in the snow holding out a coat that a woman who earned in a year less than it cost had just refused, and on his hard, unreadable face something moved that no one at the gala would have believed if they had been there to see it. "Then let me ask you a question instead," he said, drawing the coat back over his own arm, "since it seems questions are the only currency you will accept from me." He looked at her across the snow, and whatever he was about to ask, Aveline could see that it was not small, and that he was not certain of the answer, and that a man like him was not accustomed to either of those things at once. The question he asked at the gate was whether she would come and work with his sister, not for him, with Nella. 3 afternoons a week, whatever fee she named, no uniform, no house rules she had not agreed to. Aveline had said she would think about it, which was the truthful answer, and she had walked the rest of the way home in the cold with his refused coat still warm in her memory. She came back on a Thursday because Nella had drawn her a picture and sent it by a driver, a picture of a brass fork with musical notes coming out of it and 2 stick figures underneath, and no grown woman with a working heart could have said no to that. What followed was not a romance. Aveline would have told you so firmly if you had suggested it in those first weeks. It was a job. She arrived at the estate above Lake Sereno on her 3 afternoons, and she sat on the floor of the music room with a 12-year-old girl and taught her, slowly, how to be less afraid of her own body. But the man kept turning up. The first time Corrado came to the doorway of the music room with a folder in his hand and a reason on his lips, and stood there watching his sister strike the tuning fork and breathe, and forgot entirely about the folder. The second time he brought no folder and invented no reason. The third time he simply sat down at the far end of the room, on a hard chair in his expensive dark clothes, and watched and said nothing, and left when the lesson was done. Aveline learned things about him in pieces, the way you learn a cautious animal. She learned that he did not eat when he was worried, and that he was worried a great deal, and that he read every document twice. She learned that he removed his heavy watch and set it on the mantel before he ever came all the way into the music room, and that when she asked him why, he looked almost embarrassed and said that the room felt like a place a watch did not belong. She learned that the whole vast house went quieter before he entered it, and that he seemed to hate this about himself, the way people flinched, the way conversation dropped, and that the one room in the house where no one went quiet when he came in was the room where his sister sat on the floor with the cellist. She refused things constantly, and it fascinated him. She refused the car he offered to send. She refused the raise he tried to press on her in the second week, on the grounds that the work had not changed. When Nella's lessons ran late and the cook sent a tray, Aveline ate exactly 1 bowl of whatever it was, and refused the rest and would not take a single thing home. And when Corrado asked her why, she said that the last man who fed her generously had also decided later that the feeding entitled him to opinions about her, and that she would rather stay hungry and keep her opinions to herself. He did not argue. He noticed, and the next tray came with exactly 1 bowl on it and nothing else, and Aveline looked at that single bowl for a long moment and understood that she had been heard in a way she was not used to being heard, and had to turn back to the music stand so that the man would not see her face. There were small collisions between them that first month, the kind that told her more than any conversation could. Once she arrived to find that he had ordered the music room repainted a warmer color while she was away. A kindness, he thought, because she had mentioned the walls were cold, and she had stood in the doorway and felt the old dread rise, because Warren had also improved things without asking, had also called it thoughtfulness. She said nothing that day. But the next week, when the cook mentioned offhand that the master had asked 3 times whether Miss Marsh seemed pleased about the paint, Aveline understood that he had been waiting, anxious, for a verdict he had not dared ask for directly, and that the difference between him and Warren was not that he never overstepped. It was that he noticed when he had, and it cost him sleep. She told him she liked the color. She watched a knot she had not known was in his shoulders let go. Another time she found him in the music room alone, before a lesson, sitting on the floor where she usually sat, his back against the wall, trying it, she realized, trying to understand the room from the height his sister lived in. He got up quickly when he heard her, embarrassed, a powerful man caught sitting on his own floor, and she pretended she had seen nothing and loved him a little for it before she had any word for the feeling. She kept a coffee tin at home with a word written on the lid in her mother's handwriting, and in the tin she kept coins, and the word on the lid was a small stubborn dream she had never said out loud to anyone. A room of her own somewhere, a quiet room with soft light and no needles, where she could teach frightened people, children and grown ones, and even the old, how to strike one true note and breathe. She had never had enough in the tin to say the dream aloud. She said it aloud, once, to Corrado Sarno, on a grey afternoon, when Nella had fallen asleep mid-lesson on the music room floor, with the fork still in her hand, and the two adults sat in the quiet listening to the child breathe slow and whole, and Aveline told him quietly what the word on the tin lid was. He was silent for a while. Then he said, "How much?" "Do not," Aveline said. "I asked a number. And your face is already writing a check. Put it away. If your money buys my room, then it is your room, and you will be able to walk into it whenever you like. And I have already had a life where a man could walk into any room he had paid for. I would rather fill the tin 1 coin at a time for 10 years and have it be mine." Corrado Sarno looked at her for a long moment across his sleeping sister. "You are the most difficult person I have ever met," he said. And it was not, Aveline realized with a small shock, an insult. It was something perilously close to wonder. She opened her mouth to answer, and the door of the music room opened, and a man she had met only once before, on the worst night, stepped inside, and the temperature of the whole room changed. It was Dr. Emil Ravna, and he had come with a proposal, and the proposal was a contract. He laid it out on the music room table with professional care while Nella slept. A new treatment framework, he called it, structured, monitored. He was glad, he said, that Miss Marsh's little exercises had provided some comfort, but comfort was not treatment, and it would be unwise, even dangerous, to allow an untrained musician to manage a child with a serious anxiety disorder. He proposed a return to a clinical schedule. Medication as needed. Miss Marsh could stay on, he added generously, in a supporting role, under his supervision. Aveline listened to all of it and felt the old cold creep up her arms because she knew this move. It was the move where the credentialed man in the room explains, kindly, that the woman who is actually helping does not know what she is doing, and everyone nods, because he has the word doctor in front of his name and she has a mended dress. She waited for Corrado to sign it. Men with power signed the papers other powerful men put in front of them. That was how power stayed comfortable. "No," Corrado said. Emil Ravna blinked. "Corrado, with respect, you are not qualified to." "I am not," Corrado agreed. "So I will let the qualified people argue it, in writing, where I can read it twice." He turned to Aveline. "You do not trust doctors, and you do not trust me, and you certainly do not trust him. Fine. Then we will not do this on trust. Write the terms yourself." Aveline stared at him. "Write them myself. You said you trust paper more than you trust people's moods, so make paper you can trust. Write down exactly what you will and will not do with my sister, and what no one, including me, and including him, is allowed to do to her without your word. Put your dream room in it if you like. Put anything in it. I will sign the version you write, not the version he brought." Emil Ravna had gone very still. Ottavia Voss, who had drifted into the doorway as she always did when something was being decided, had gone stiller. Aveline picked up the pen. Her hand did not shake. It never shook when it mattered. She wrote that her work was hers, that Nella would never be restrained or sedated in her presence without a genuine medical emergency defined by a doctor she trusted, that either of them could end the arrangement with a week of notice, and at the bottom, after a long pause, she wrote one more line. That her past was hers, and no one in this house would investigate it, or repeat what they learned of it, unless her actual safety demanded it. She slid it across the table. Corrado read it twice, as he read everything. "Immediate safety," he said, tapping the last line. "Who decides what counts?" "I do," Aveline said, expecting the fight. "Yes," he said, and signed. "You do." If I decided for you, then the word means nothing and the whole page is a lie. And as he set down the pen, Aveline heard, from the hallway, the sound of a phone buzzing, and saw Corrado's driver appear white-faced in the doorway, and watched the boss's face change into something she had not seen on it before, and knew, before he said a word, that the quiet part of her life was over. The call was business, and business was the part of Corrado Sarno's life that Aveline had agreed, without ever discussing it, not to see. Men arrived at the estate with tense faces and left with tenser ones. Doors closed. She learned to read his days by his jaw, the way she read Nella's by her breathing, and she asked him nothing, and he told her nothing, and that silence was its own kind of trust. But the world outside the music room had begun to notice her, and the world outside the music room did not ask first. It began with Warren. His name came up on her phone on a Tuesday, the first time in months, and her shoulders climbed toward her ears before she had decided anything. She let it go to voicemail. She listened to the voicemail once, standing in her small kitchen, and his voice was exactly as she remembered it, warm and reasonable, and full of a concern that was really a leash. He had heard, he said, that she was spending time up at the Sarno place. He was worried about her. Men like that, he said, they collected unusual people for a while, the way you might keep an interesting stray, and then the novelty wore off and they put them back out in the cold, and he only wanted her to be prepared for that because he knew how she got her hopes up and he did not want to see her hurt again. Take care of yourself, Aveline. Try not to make it strange. She deleted it. Then she recovered it from the deleted folder and listened to it a second time, because old wounds ask to be pressed even after they close, and she hated herself for it, and she pressed it anyway. That was the state Corrado found her in when he came to collect Nella's Thursday lesson, and he was too observant a man not to see it. He did not ask about the phone. He asked if she was safe, and she said yes, and he asked if she needed anything, and she said no. And he nodded and stepped back, and the not asking hurt, in a way she had not expected, because part of her had wanted to be asked. Corrado, she said, before she could stop herself, do you ever hear someone's voice in your head after they are gone from your life? He stood in the doorway with the snow melting on his shoulders and considered the question with the full seriousness he gave everything. Every day, he said. How do you make it stop? I do not. He looked past her, toward the music room where Nella was striking the fork. I decide whether it gets to be in the room. Aveline looked down at the phone in her hand. Mine tells me I ruin things, that I make calm into chaos, that no one keeps me for long. Her throat had gone tight. Sometimes it uses my own voice to say it. Corrado Sarno was quiet for a moment. He did not come into the room. He did not touch her. He stayed in the doorway, where he had learned to stay. Then borrow a different one, he said, until you can find your own again. Whose? Mine, he said, and his voice was very low and very certain. You do not make chaos, Aveline. You walk into rooms full of it, and you find the one true note. I have watched you do it to a child who terrified specialists. You did it to a whole ballroom without meaning to. If you need a voice in your head that is not lying to you, borrow that one, until yours comes back. He left before she could answer. And Aveline stood in her kitchen and deleted Warren's voicemail a final time, permanently, and this time she did not go looking for it in the deleted folder, and it felt like setting down something she had been carrying so long she had stopped noticing its weight. The trouble was that Warren was not the only one who had noticed her, and the next thing to arrive was not a voicemail. It was a photograph, and it was waiting for Corrado on a gray morning, slid under his office door by a hand no camera had caught, and what was written on the back of it would end the quiet part of everything. Before the photograph, though, there was the storm, and the storm was the night everything between them became real. Winter had loosened its grip by then. The snow along the estate walls had gone to gray slush and then to bare wet stone, and the lake, which had lain silent under ice for months, had begun to move again and mutter at night. The first real thunder of the year came in fast off the water on an evening when the lesson had run long and the roads had iced over in the cold that still crept back after dark. And Corrado had told Aveline plainly that she was not driving down the mountain in it, and she had been too tired and the weather too genuinely dangerous for her to make it a matter of principle. So she stayed. A guest room was made up, and somewhere near midnight the thunder began, and Nella began to come apart. Aveline heard it before anyone came for her, the particular pitch of a child's fear carrying through a big house, and she was in the hallway in her borrowed robe before she had fully woken. She found Nella in the upstairs corridor with her back against the wall, sliding toward the floor, her breath gone to that short drowning pull, and she found Corrado already there, already crouched, already failing, his voice pitched into the low command that had never once worked and would never work, telling his sister to breathe, telling her she was safe, and the girl only got worse because a command is a wall and fear needs a door. Corrado, Aveline said, stop talking. He turned, and she saw in his face the thing she had never seen there, raw helplessness, the most powerful man in the province brought to his knees by a 12-year-old's terror, and no amount of money able to touch it. Sit down, she said. On the floor. Both of us. Down at her level, not over her. And stop sounding like the thunder. Every instinct in the man resisted. She watched it move through him, the refusal of a person who had survived by staying above the ground, by never being lower than a threat. And then he lowered himself onto the floor of his own hallway in the dark, and Aveline understood what it cost him, and understood that he was paying it for his sister without hesitation, and something in her chest that had been locked for 2 years turned over. She had not expected that. She had built her whole careful life on the certainty that men with power did not lower themselves, that the lowering was the one thing they would never do, because it was the lowering, not the shouting, that had been beyond Warren. Warren would apologize with words. He would send flowers. He would never once, in 7 years, have put his own body on the floor and made himself smaller than the person he had frightened. And here was a man the whole province stepped around, folding down onto cold boards in the dark because a broken cellist had told him it might help a child breathe, and doing it without a single question, without needing to understand it first, because she had said it and he had decided that was enough. She sat on Nella's other side, leaving the girl the space to choose. She took the tuning fork from the pocket of the borrowed robe because she had begun carrying it everywhere without deciding to, and she struck it against her own knee, and the one true note lifted into the dark over the thunder. Nella, she said, you know this one, in on the rise, let it fall on its own. She began the 4 notes, and then she did something she had never done in front of Corrado. She reached over and took his hand and placed it flat on the floorboards beside his sister, not on the child, near her, and she put her own hand beside his. Do not hold her, she murmured. Just be a steady thing on the floor that she can come to if she wants. Breathe slow. She is listening to all of us even when it does not look like it. Show her there is nothing chasing her. The girl's breathing was ragged. Corrado's beside her was too fast. Aveline slowed her own on purpose, made it deep and unhurried, and she felt, after a minute, the man begin to match it, this enormous, dangerous person, lowering his own breath to follow a cellist's on the floor of a dark hallway. And then, slowly, the child began to match them both. The drowning pool got a little longer, then longer. A thunderclap rolled across the lake, and the girl flinched but did not break, and her breath found the bottom of her lungs and stayed there, and after a while she listed sideways and put her head in Aveline's lap and slept. They stayed on the floor. Neither of them moved for fear of waking her. The storm walked away across the water. Who does this for you? Corrado said quietly. In the dark. What? Sits on the floor with you when the room gets louder than the danger. Aveline was quiet for a moment. No one, she said, and it came out more honest than she meant it. People usually wait to see what I will drop. Then they have been watching the wrong moment, he said. And in the dark, over his sleeping sister, Corrado Sarno told her the thing he had never told anyone. That Nella was not truly his sister, not by blood, that she was the daughter of a man who had died working for him, a man Corrado had failed to protect, and that he had taken the child in at 9 years old with her terror already fully grown, and that everyone in his life had come to him after his name became a thing to fear. Everyone had wanted something, calculated something, except this broken, frightened girl, who had needed him for nothing but to be less alone. He had spent 3 years and a fortune trying to buy her a cure, because buying things was the only language he was fluent in, and it had never once worked. And then a cellist had sat on his floor and asked the child's permission, and the child had breathed. She is the only person who needed me before I was useful, he said, and I could not help her. Until you. Aveline looked at him across the sleeping child, and she reached out and she took his hand, and this time she did not place it on the floor. She held it. And Corrado Sarno looked down at their two hands as though a thing he had stopped believing in had arrived very quietly in the night. And neither of them said anything else, because nothing else needed saying, and that was the moment the job stopped being a job. 3 weeks later, a guard found the photograph under the office door. The photograph showed Aveline outside her own small building, unaware, her face circled in red ink. On the back, in a hand no one recognized, someone had written that even the most careful men leave their soft things out in the open. Corrado read it once. By noon there were men at the foot of her street. By afternoon he had decided her building could not be made safe. And by the time Aveline came home from teaching, she found a car waiting, and her landlord apologetic and frightened, and two of Corrado's men carrying her things, her cello, her few boxes, the coffee tin, with the word on the lid, up the estate drive toward a suite in the main house, where someone had already arranged her books on shelves and set her kettle on a marble counter, and stood her mother's tuning fork in a small dish beside a vase that cost more than everything else she owned combined. They had rebuilt her life from memory, and it was beautiful, and it was a cage, and she knew the difference in her body the instant she walked in. Corrado was waiting by the tall windows. "What is this?" she said. "You are safe here," he said. "Until the threat is dealt with, you will stay in the house. I have doubled the men on the eastern wall. No one reaches you here. You moved my things." Her voice had gone very quiet. "You moved my things and my cello and my mother's fork without asking me." "There was no decision to make," he said. "Someone put a red circle on your face and slid it under my door. I was not going to leave you in a building I cannot hold. So you emptied my home while I was out and rebuilt it here where you can walk into it whenever you like. I am trying to keep you alive." And there it was. The sentence. The exact sentence. In a different mouth. In a more expensive room. Men loved that sentence, Aveline thought, because it made a cage sound like care. Warren had loved it. "I am only trying to protect you." It was what he had said when he took her car keys. It was what he had said when he told their friends she was too fragile to be left alone. "You watched me," Aveline said, and her voice shook once, and she let it. "For months. You watched me sit on the floor and ask a terrified child for permission before I touched her. You watched me wait in a doorway, rather than move her where I wanted her to go. You told me it was the wisest thing you had ever seen. And the first time you were frightened, you did to me the exact thing you swore your sister would never have done to her. You decided my no did not count because you had not bothered to ask for it." Corrado's jaw tightened. "This is different. Someone wants to hurt you. That is what every controlling man believes, that his fear is the special one, that his reason is the one that earns him the right to move me around the board." She was crying now, and she did not stop. "I got out of a life where a man decided what was best for my own good. I will not walk into another one because this one has a better view of the lake. Do not," he said, and his voice had gone rough, "compare me to him. Then do not do what he did with more expensive furniture." Anger flared in his eyes, real anger, and Aveline's body braced for it out of 2 years of habit, flinched before her mind could catch it, and he saw the flinch, and it stopped him cold. She watched the fury drain out of his face and something worse take its place, the horror of a man who has just seen a person he cares for prepare to be struck by him. "You are afraid of me," he said slowly. "Right now," she said, "I am afraid of how easily you decided my choice did not matter." The silence in the beautiful cage was total. In the doorway, drawn by the raised voices, Nella had appeared, looking between them with frightened eyes, the fork clutched in her hand. "I am ending it," Aveline said. "The arrangement, all of it, I will not be kept." "Nella needs you," Corrado said, and the instant it left his mouth she saw him understand what he had done, saw the regret crash across his face, because he had reached for the child as a leash, the one thing he had promised her he would never do. Aveline looked at him, and the tears came harder, because that one had gone all the way in. "Do not," she whispered, "use her. I taught her that being loved would never be a leash. Do not make me prove to her that I was lying." Corrado Sarno closed his eyes. When he opened them, something in him had broken and rearranged. "You are right," he said. "I should not have. Not that. Never that." He stepped back, physically back, giving her the room. "One driver will take you anywhere you choose. No men, no following. He leaves the moment you arrive. I will not contact you again unless you ask me to." Aveline took the small brass tuning fork from the dish. her mother's fork, the one true thing, and she closed her hand around it, and she walked out of the beautiful room she had not chosen, past the frightened child in the doorway, and it was the hardest thing she had done since she left Warren, and she did it because leaving was the whole point of everything she had learned. She moved into 2 rented rooms above a shuttered bookshop at the far edge of Verano, a narrow bed, a window over an alley. It was cold, and it was small, and it was hers. She took work at a veterinary and elder care clinic in town, of all things, calming frightened animals and frightened old people with the same 4 notes, and she started quietly to say the word on the coffee tin out loud to the people she helped. Corrado did not call. He sent one message, the morning after she left, that he had watched her give his sister a choice every single day, and had believed that his fear made it acceptable to take hers, and that it had not, and that her things were already back in the rented rooms exactly as she had packed them, and her final fee was with the housekeeper, and that he would not reach for her again unless she reached first. She read it every night for a week and did not answer. And 9 miles up the mountain, in a house full of guards and money and quiet, a 12-year-old girl stopped sleeping and stopped eating and began sitting by the eastern gate each evening with a brass tuning fork clutched in her hand, striking it, trying to breathe to a note that only worked when the right person was beside her. And Corrado Sarno sat beside his sister in the cold, and did not photograph her grief, and did not send it down the mountain as a message, because he had promised, and because some things he was learning, you were not allowed to use even when using them would bring back the thing you wanted most. The second storm came 3 weeks later, off the lake, hard and sudden, the way they did. Aveline was walking home from the clinic under an umbrella when she saw the shape at the bottom of her narrow stair, and her heart knew before her eyes did. Nella, soaked to the bone, shivering, small and stubborn, and utterly alone, sitting on the wet step below the shuttered bookshop with a brass tuning fork clutched in one blue cold hand. Nella. Aveline dropped the umbrella and went to her knees on the wet stone. Sweetheart, how are you here? How did you? I took the early bus, the girl said, teeth chattering, fierce with the effort of the thing she had done. I looked up the clinic. I had money. I did it myself. Her chin trembled. The fork does not work without you. I tried. It does not work. Aveline gathered the freezing child against her and held on, and over the girl's wet hair she saw headlights turn into the alley, and she knew that too before the car door opened. Corrado Sarno came through the rain to the foot of the stair and stopped. He looked first at Nella, confirming with his whole body that she was alive and whole, and only then at Aveline, and he did not come closer. She has been planning it for days, he said over the rain. She left a note. I have had every driver on the mountain looking since noon. I followed the bus route the moment we found it. He did not move toward them. I am not here to take her from you. I am here because she is 12, and it is freezing and I was terrified. That is all. Whatever you decide, I will do. Aveline stood, keeping the child wrapped against her. She walked into a storm and took a bus down a mountain, because a tuning fork will not work for her without me. Do you understand what that means? This is not something you can fix by moving her closer to me. She has to be able to breathe when I am not there. That was the whole point. That was always the whole point. I know, Corrado said. I have learned it 3 weeks too late, sitting on the floor of a house I cannot help her in, watching her strike that fork and get nothing back. Rain ran down his face. I did not come to move you again. I came to ask if I may come up out of the rain. Only that. And if the answer is no, I will take nothing and I will go, and the driver will bring her back to you tomorrow, and every tomorrow you allow, on your terms, in writing, forever. Aveline looked at him standing in the rain at the bottom of her stair, the most feared man in the province waiting for permission to climb 4 steps, and she thought about Warren, who had never once asked to come into any room he believed was his. You can come up, she said. He wiped his shoes on the mat at the top of the stair, though the mat was soaked and it made no difference, and he did it anyway, and Aveline understood the gesture. He sat on the floor of her small cold rooms on the far side, giving the space its distance. She dried the child with every towel she owned and set her mother's fork and Nella's fork side by side on the little table, and put the kettle on, and for a while the only sound was the rain and the child's slowly steadying breath. I thought, Corrado said quietly, when Nella had fallen asleep between them, that keeping someone safe meant removing every risk from the room. That is how I have stayed alive. I did not understand that safety a person did not choose feels exactly like a prison. You told me that. You told me in words, and I heard the words, and I did not change the thing underneath them. He looked at his hands. And now I am a man who sits on floors and waits at the bottom of stairs. It is a poor trade for you. But it is the only honest one I have. It is a beginning, Aveline said. She set out her terms and he agreed to all of them before she finished saying them, that she would not come back as anyone's employee, that she would take the 2 rented rooms and keep them in her own name, and if she ever came back up the mountain, it would be to a place that was hers, with a lease, at a rent she chose. That she would open the room on the tin lid with her own coins in her own hands, and that he could help only if she asked in writing, with the exit clauses she had already begun drafting in her head, that he would keep his business on his side of a door she did not open. That Nella would see her often, on a schedule they wrote down together, so that the child never again had to take a storm and a bus to feel safe. I will hate the exit clauses, Corrado said. That is not a no, Aveline said. No, he agreed. It is not. The storm moved off across the lake. The child slept between them with a fork in each of her hands. And Corrado Sarno reached into his wet coat and took out the key to the estate cottage below the eastern wall, the small one that had stood empty for years, and he set it on the floor between them, not in her hand, on the floor, where she could take it or leave it. That is yours, he said, whether you ever use it or not, and whether you ever let me through its door or not. I had no right to make the first place that ever belonged to you feel like it belonged to me. This one has your name on the lease already. The housekeeper drew it up. You owe me nothing for it and you may tear it up tonight. Aveline looked at the key on the floor of her small rooms that were hers. Then she picked it up. Come back tomorrow, she said. We will talk about it over soup. Something moved across the hard, unreadable face that half the province feared, something young and disbelieving and warm. Is that 2 invitations or 1? He said. Do not, she said, be difficult. You told me once that was not always an insult. Tomorrow, she said, and you leave tonight, when I ask you to. Disappointment crossed his face, and then behind it, something better, because she had said tonight and not never, and he had learned by now to hear the difference. Thank you, he said at the door, for letting me climb the stairs. Thank you, she said, for waiting at the bottom of them until I did. He came back the next night with no men at the door and no gift but a loaf of bread, and they ate soup at the small table while the child, brought down properly by a driver this time, slept by the little heater with a fork in her hand. And some weeks after that, when the coffee tin had a lease in it instead of coins because a stubborn woman had finally let a stubborn man co-sign a loan buried under so many exit clauses, he called it an insult to his dignity. Aveline Marsh opened a small quiet room on the edge of Verano with soft light and no needles, where frightened people of every age came to learn how to strike one true note and breathe. Nella was her first and proudest helper, striking the fork for children more frightened than she had ever been, living proof that a large fear did not have to stay large. Warren's voice did not come into the new room. Aveline had stopped keeping it, and Corrado Sarno, who could empty a room by entering it and command men across a province, learned to knock on a small door and wait, and to ask before he changed a single thing, and on the rare evenings he forgot and reached to fix instead of ask, a 12-year-old girl would cross the room and sit beside the cellist, and the man the whole province stepped around would understand that he had been outvoted by the 2 people whose votes were the only ones that had ever counted. The room on the edge of Verano grew a small reputation over that first year, the kind that travels by word of mouth among people too tired to hope for much. A mother brought a boy who had not spoken in a waiting room in 2 years. An old man came whose hands shook so badly he could not hold a cup, until he learned to strike a fork and breathe, and then, one Tuesday, he held the cup. Aveline kept the coffee tin on a shelf by the door where every person who came in could see it. The words still on the lid in her mother's handwriting, and when someone asked what it meant she told them the truth, that it had been a dream she had been too afraid to say out loud, and that saying it out loud, 1 coin and 1 true note at a time, had turned out to be the whole of the cure. He asked her once, on a cold clear night at the door of the room that was hers, whether he should leave. Months before, the question would have frightened her, because with Warren every answer had carried a punishment. She looked around the small warm room, at the 2 forks on the table, at the sleeping child, at the man who could command half the province standing in a doorway, waiting for a woman in a twice-mended dress to tell him what she wanted. No, she said, stay. And the most feared man on the lake, who had walked past every woman in a golden ballroom to reach the one crying alone in the snow, hung his coat beside hers and stayed.